I just wanted to turn in my compass that day, and I almost snapped at the woman at the museum over it. That's how it started, a small thing that turned into something bigger than I could have imagined. At the end of the story, leave your opinion below, and don't forget to subscribe, and we'll continue. My name is Mara Velasco. I am 17 years old. I live in Newport, Oregon, where the ocean is noisy at the docks and the air always smells of fish and salt. It was a couple months ago, late spring. I had just gotten off the bus, clutching an old wooden box my grandfather had left me. He'd been a fisherman all his life, the kind of guy who came home with tales of storms and crab traps, not gifts. In the box was his ship's compass, rusty and worn, but the arrow still pointed north. Grandfather had written a note with his trembling hand, "Find him a home where he'll mean something, Mara." So I decided to take it to the Newport Maritime Museum. They were having an exhibit about local fishermen there, and I thought it would be nice to have his name on a plaque or something. I was wearing my overalls from vocational school, navy blue, with orange stripes on the sleeves. It wasn't fancy, but I didn't change after class. My hair was in a braid to keep it out of my face, and my backpack hung on one shoulder. But the box was the most important thing. I held it tight, clutching it to my chest as I walked up the steps of the museum, passing a couple of tourists who were taking pictures of the port. My stomach was churning. What if they didn't want it? What if they said it was junk? I kept telling myself it would be okay. Grandpa deserved it. I wasn't going to let him down. It was quieter inside than I thought it would be. It smelled like polished wood and seagrass, and somewhere in the corner a machine hummed with a noise like waves. I walked up to the counter and my sneakers squeaked a little on the floor. Behind the counter stood a woman, about 45 years old, gray hair pulled back into a tight bundle, glasses on her nose. Her name tag said Evelyn. She looked up as I approached, and I swear she squinted at me like she was trying to figure out what kind of fruit I was. "Hi," I said, carefully placing the box on the counter so I wouldn't bang it. "I've got something here for the museum. My grandfather's compass. He fished here all his life." Evelyn didn't even smile, just pitched forward a little, looking at the box as if it would bite her. "We don't take stuff off the street," she said sharply. "Do you have any paperwork to prove what it is?" I blinked. "ID?" "No," I said, stepping from foot to foot. "It's just his compass. He left it to me before he died. Thought it would be good for your exhibit." She crossed her arms, looking me over from head to toe, the jumpsuit, the braid, my swarthy skin. "How do I know you didn't bring this in secondhand and pass it off as your own?" she asked. "Do you even know what this exhibition is about?" It stung. I felt the heat rising to my neck, but I kept my voice steady. "Yeah, about the fisherman from Newport. My grandfather worked on boats for 40 years. I'm not making it up." She was quiet for a second, just staring. My hands were sweating, and I gripped the edges of the box tighter. I'd come here thinking it would be easy. I'd give it to her, say thank you, and leave. Now I wondered if I'd even bothered. Maybe I look like a girl who's trying to fool someone. I'm not stupid. I know that people are quick to label you, especially if you're young and not in a needlepoint suit. My mom always says, "Keep your head up, Mara. Don't let them trample you down." But here, under Evelyn's gaze, I wondered if I could do it. "Look," I said, pulling the box closer. "Why don't you just look at it? It's real. I'm not here to waste your time." She sighed, loudly, so that the guy who was leafing through a brochure next to her glanced at us. "Okay," she muttered, "but don't expect me to take your word for it." I nodded, trying not to clench my jaw. This was supposed to be about Grandpa, not about me proving anything to this aunt. But inside, I had a feeling it was only going to get worse. After I put the box on the counter, things didn't go as I'd hoped. Evelyn, the woman behind the counter, didn't even try to hide her distrust of me. She stood there with her arms crossed and looked at me as if I had stolen that compass. I could feel her gaze clinging to my overalls and swarthy skin with obvious suspicion. At that moment, I wanted to just turn around and leave the museum quickly. But I reminded myself that this was not about me, but about my grandfather and his memory. "So you're saying it was your grandfather who left you this compass?" she asked with obvious skepticism in her voice. Her tone was as if she had already decided I was lying without checking anything. I nodded and tried to answer calmly so as not to give her any reason to get even more angry. "Yeah, he fished here for 40 years and left it to me before he died," I said confidently. But she only squinted, as if my words sounded too good to be true. "And where did he get such a thing if he was just a fisherman?" She continued, not hiding her sneer. I felt my insides tighten at her tone, which hinted at something more. It wasn't just a question about the compass, but about who I was and where I'd come from. He found it himself on an old ship when he was working at sea, I explained patiently. But her face didn't change, and she continued to look at me with obvious disbelief. I wondered why she felt that way about me, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe it was because I didn't look like the people she was used to seeing in the museum. Mom had always warned me that some people would judge me by my appearance without really getting into it. I stood there, holding the box, and I could feel her gaze penetrating me to the bone. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something like, "You're out of place here." "Look, I can show you the note from Grandpa if you need proof," I offered, trying to keep my voice steady. She snorted, as if my offer only confirmed her thoughts of me being suspicious. "A note? That doesn't mean anything yet. Anyone can write anything on a piece of paper," she cut off quickly. I opened my mouth to object, but she had already turned away and started rummaging through some papers. I noticed the guy with the brochure in the corner furtively looking at us with interest. I felt hot, and I realized that everyone around me was starting to pay attention to me. It wasn't the kind of thing where you want to be noticed. It was quite the opposite. I stood there thinking how quickly things had gone wrong because of her attitude towards me. She hadn't even opened the box, but she had already decided that I was trying to trick her, or something worse. "Can't you at least look at the compass itself before you say that?" I asked, feeling annoyed. She turned to me with a face like I had crossed some sort of line by daring to say that. "I'll look into it when I'm sure it's not a waste of my time," she replied coldly. Her words hit me because I realized she didn't see me as a person, but as a problem to be solved. I squeezed the box tighter, and I thought my grandfather would have told me not to give up in front of her. But everything was boiling inside, and I began to wonder if I should even continue this conversation. When Evelyn turned away from me with obvious irritation, I sensed that the situation was getting worse. She wasn't even going to listen to me further, as if I had already proven her right by my presence. I stood at the counter, clutching the compass box, wondering how far this could go. Her attitude toward me wasn't just distrust, it was imbued with something large and unpleasant. I began to suspect that it wasn't just the compass, but the way she'd seen me all along. "I need to verify who you are before I accept anything from you," she said, finally turning to me. Her voice sounded like I was some kind of thief who'd snuck into the museum by trickery. I pulled my school ID out of my backpack and held it out to her with the hope of understanding. "Here, this is my ID, and I have a note from my grandfather too," I said calmly. But she took the ID, looked at it briefly, and frowned as if it meant nothing. "You're 17, and you bring an old thing in here and expect me to believe it?" she asked with a sneer. Her words hurt me more than I expected because there was a hint of my appearance in them. I saw her gaze linger on my face, on my swarthy skin, and it wasn't by accident. "My grandfather left me this, and I want it to be remembered," I replied firmly. But she only hummed, as if my words were an empty sound that wasn't worth her time. Just then a young guy, a museum worker, came over and tried to intervene in our conversation with a friendly smile. "I can look at the compass if you want, it's no problem for me," he said to Evelyn. But she turned sharply toward him and cut him short before he could finish speaking. "Stay out of this, Tim. I'll handle it myself. You have to be careful with the likes of them around here," she cut him off. I realized that by such, she meant me, and it hit me right in the chest. I wondered why she was so sure I was trying to scam her, even though there was no proof. Maybe because I don't look like those white tourists who come here with fat wallets? My mom often said that some people would see me as a threat even if I was just standing still. I could feel the stares of other visitors starting to stick to me like I was doing something wrong. It was humiliating, and I fought the urge to just pick up the box and walk away. "I'm not trying to trick you. I just want to give the compass to you for exhibition," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Evelyn looked at me as if I had dared to talk too much in her presence. "You think you can come here and demand that I accept everything?" She threw with obvious irritation. Her tone made it clear that she wasn't going to believe me no matter what I said. I noticed Tim, the guy, look away, as if he was embarrassed by her words. The people around me started whispering, and I realized I was becoming the center of attention out of choice. It wasn't about the compass anymore, it was about how she decided to make a problem out of me. When Evelyn finished telling Tim off, I realized she wasn't going to stop there. Her face was red with irritation, and she was clearly determined to prove her point at any cost. I stood at the counter, feeling my patience begin to crack at the seams with her attacks. She wasn't just doubting the compass, she was looking at me like I was a threat to the museum. It was more than mistrust, and I knew my swarthy skin was playing a part in it. We need to check all of this out so there won't be any problems later, she said, grabbing her phone. Her voice was harsh, and she didn't even try to hide her contempt for me. I squeezed the box tighter and asked, trying not to snap into a raised tone, "Why check when I've already given my ID and my grandfather's note?" But she ignored my question and started dialing, as if I wasn't standing in front of her at all. The guard came out of the corridor, a big man with broad shoulders and a stone face. His name tag read Leo, and he looked at me with a slight squint, assessing the situation. "What's going on here? Any complications with this girl?" he asked Evelyn calmly. She nodded and pointed at me like I was some kind of exhibit that needed to be removed. "She's trying to turn in an old item, and I'm not sure it's legal," she said with certainty. I felt the blood rush to my face because her words sounded like I had stolen that compass. "I'm not doing anything illegal. I just want to give the compass to the exhibit," I said, looking at Leo. He shrugged and asked me, trying to speak evenly but with a note of suspicion, "Are you sure it's yours and you're not causing trouble here?" I shook my head and replied, feeling my voice shaking with tension inside, "No, I'm not causing trouble. I just came here with a gift from my grandfather." But Evelyn interrupted me by raising her hand to silence me, and it was humiliating. "We can't just accept things from anyone without checking," she said loudly. Her words, "anyone," hung in the air, and I realized that she meant me. It wasn't about the museum's rules, it was about the fact that I didn't fit into her picture of the world. Tim, the guy behind the counter, tried to intervene again to somehow lighten the mood. "Look, this isn't standard procedure. We can just look at the compass," he said quietly. But Evelyn turned to him and barked, not holding back her anger. "I said I'll take care of it myself. Stay out of this." I wondered why she was so stubborn, and the answer was right in front of me, in her gaze. She didn't see me as a person with a story, but as a dark-skinned girl who didn't belong here. The patrons around me began to glance around, and I could feel their curiosity pressing me harder and harder. Leo stepped closer, and I stepped back involuntarily because his presence made it all the more real. This wasn't just an argument anymore, it was like I was about to be made out to be a criminal. As Leo stood next to me and Evelyn held the phone, I felt the situation spinning out of control. Her fingers were still clutching my compass, and she was looking at me with obvious distaste. I tried to keep my cool, but inside everything was boiling with her unfair treatment of me. This wasn't just an argument about an old thing, it was about how she'd seen me all along. I knew my swarthy skin and school overalls were a red rag to her. "If you can't explain where that came from, I'll call someone else," Evelyn said with cold certainty. She was about to press a button on the phone when the door at the far end of the hall opened suddenly. I heard footsteps, firm and measured, and turned my head to see who it was. A woman in a strict gray jacket stepped out of the office, her dark hair gathered into a neat knot. She looked like she was used to being listened to, and I recognized her face immediately. "What's going on here? Why is there such a commotion in my museum?" she asked, stepping closer. Her voice was calm, but there was a power in it that made everyone freeze. Evelyn immediately changed her tone, as if caught on something, and began to explain with a strained smile. "This girl brought in some old stuff, and I'm making sure everything is up to code," she said quickly. I looked at the woman and couldn't stand it, because it was my mom. "Mom." I blurted out, and I saw Evelyn freeze, as if she'd been punched in the face. My mom, Elena Velasco, looked at me, then at Evelyn, and her eyes narrowed with understanding. "You mean my daughter came here and you're interrogating her?" she asked quietly. Her words hung in the air, and I felt the tension in the room shift dramatically in my favor. Leo stepped back like he didn't want to be a part of this, and Tim behind the counter held back a smile. I didn't know she was your daughter. It's just a test," Evelyn muttered, losing confidence. Her mom stepped closer and looked at her as if she could see right through her, which was worse than screaming. "You didn't need to know who she was to treat her with respect," she said firmly. I stood beside her and felt the weight begin to fall from my shoulders, but I was still uneasy inside. It wasn't about winning, it was about having to prove my right to be here. "This is my father's compass. He's been fishing here for 40 years, Mom added, taking the box. She opened it and showed the rusty compass, and I saw Evelyn swallow, realizing her mistake. "Have you decided she has no right to come here with this?" Mom asked without raising her voice. Her calmness made things even harder for Evelyn, and I saw her start to squirm in her seat. I wondered if anything would have changed if Mom hadn't come out of her office. Her presence had changed everything, but I knew that without her, I would have been kicked out. It wasn't about the compass, it was about how Evelyn saw me as an outsider from the first second. After my mom took the compass in her hands, I felt like I could finally exhale, in peace. Evelyn stood silent, her face pale, and she clearly didn't know what to say now. Mom held the box like it was something sacred and looked at everyone around her. I saw her gaze travel over Leo, Tim, and the visitors who fell silent in anticipation. It was the moment when everything Evelyn had said was going to backfire on her. This compass belonged to my father, who fished here for 40 years without rest, Mom began firmly. Her voice was even, but there was a power in it that made everyone listen intently. Mara brought him here to honor his memory, and you made her a suspect, she added, looking at Evelyn. I stood beside her and felt her words lift some of the weight off my shoulders, but not all of it. I was still sickened that I had to go through this because of her. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just checking in like I'm supposed to according to the rules, Evelyn muttered quietly. Her voice was shaking, and she tried to justify herself, but it sounded pathetic after everything that had happened. Her mom shook her head and replied in a way that left Evelyn no chance to argue further. You didn't have to make her a problem just because of the way she looks, she said sternly. I knew Mom was referring to my swarthy skin and simple overalls, and it cut me. The customers started nodding, and I noticed one man in the corner looking at Evelyn reproachfully. Tim behind the counter coughed, as if he wanted to say something, but decided to keep his mouth shut to stay out of it. Leo backed away even further and crossed his arms, clearly not wanting to get involved in this showdown. Mom turned to me and held out the compass box for me to decide his fate. Do you want him to stay here or will you take him home? She asked softly. I looked at the compass and thought that Grandpa would have wanted him on display, in spite of everything. Let him stay. I want people to know about Grandpa and his work, I said quietly. Mom nodded, and I felt it was my choice, not someone else's favor after the humiliation. Evelyn lowered her head, and I could see her hands shaking as she tried to gather her thoughts. It wasn't the feeling of victory you dream of, but something bitter, because I had to prove myself. I wondered how many more times I'd have to deal with someone like Evelyn in my life. Her attitude toward me wasn't just a mistake, it was infused with what she'd thought of me from the first time she'd seen me. Mom put her hand on my shoulder and said quietly, so only I could hear her words. You did the right thing, and that's the main thing you should always remember, she whispered. I nodded, but there was still a feeling stirring inside that without her, I would have lost this battle. After I decided to leave the compass at the museum, my mom and I went outside together. It was already a couple hours after the whole thing with Evelyn inside. We walked along the waterfront where the wind off the ocean fluttered our hair and seagulls yelled overhead. I still held the box in my hands, though the compass was now in my mom's office for processing. I could breathe easier, but my mind was spinning with thoughts of what had happened earlier. Mom, if you hadn't come out, would I have been kicked out of there? I asked, looking at the water. My voice was quiet, but I wanted to hear the truth, whatever it was. She stopped and looked at me, as if deciding how best to answer that question. Probably yes if you started arguing or just stood your ground, she said honestly. Her words hit me because I knew she was right, and it had to do with the way I looked. I just wanted to do something nice for Grandpa, not fight her, I said, kicking a pebble. Mom nodded and put her hand on my shoulder so I could feel her support by my side. You did, Mara. You gave him a place to be remembered, she replied softly. I looked at her and realized that she was proud of me despite everything that had happened. But inside, I was still angry that I had to prove my right to be there. Why did she immediately assume I was lying without even checking anything? I asked, feeling a lump in my throat. Mom sighed and looked at the waves that were crashing against the rocks near the shore with noise. Some people only see what they want to see, and you didn't fit in for her, she said calmly. I knew she was referring to my swarthy skin and simple overalls, not my compass. It wasn't the first time I'd been hinted that I was out of place. I wondered how often I would still have to face this attitude in the future. Mom always said to keep my head up, but it was hard after today. You shouldn't let someone like Evelyn decide who you are, Mom added firmly. Her words stuck in my head, and I felt them give me strength inside. I nodded and decided that I wasn't going to let it break me no matter what happened next. Meanwhile, at the museum, Evelyn was sitting in an office with the director behind a closed door. I learned later that she had been reprimanded for the way she had treated me rudely. But I didn't care because I was already moving on with a new understanding of myself. I looked at the ocean and thought that my grandfather would have told me to never give up. That day changed me, and I knew I would remember his lessons forever. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up.